Then we are live. Welcome, everyone. We will now be beginning our goBILDA 101 session. Before we begin, I would just like to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded, and as such, chat and Q&A will be monitored during the session. So be sure to utilize your gracious professionalism. Anyways, now that our presenter's ready, we'll go ahead and get started. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Ethan Doak.
Hey guys, so I'm Ethan. Let's see, I started FTC just about 6 years ago. Before I started here at goBILDA, I was a team member for a while and the team mentor of several different FTC teams. The most notable being Recharged Green from Pella, Iowa. Now I live here in Kansas with Robot Zone. Here at goBILDA, Robot Zone, Servos City, whichever flavor you want to look at. I do a lot of research and development and also a lot of customer facing general content. So I create a lot of videos and do some live streams and also talk to a lot of our FTC customers over the phone and via email and stuff like that. My primary focus in R&D is kits, really. A lot of our chassis and FTC kits that we're looking at, we've either created new for this upcoming season or have modified for this season. I had a really big hand in. So that's kind of my focus. A lot of those builds with parts more than coming up with new parts. So today, we're just going to kind of take a look at the what goBILDA is, why it's different, kind of what the advantages are, and where to get started when you're using it. So if you have any questions throughout the stream, throughout the class, definitely feel free to use that Q&A and ask, and I'll be able to take a look at those as you ask them and should be able to talk about those as they come up. So goBILDA started, I believe we launched our own website just about 2.5 years ago now, if I remember right. We're definitely not a new company. We're also the company behind Servos City and Actobotics. That's why those websites look very similar now. So, and that side of our company has been around since I was in diapers, so a long time. And a big reason we started goBILDA was that a lot of our customers wanted a metric option alongside the very Imperial focused Servos City line. You can see a lot of our parts are pretty similar. So that was a big motivation. And it also gave us the ability to kind of step back and take a whole fresh look at building systems. Servos City first started back in Actobotics, was first dreamt up as Ryan, our founder, was just building robots for companies and for personal use and was kind of sick of making every part from scratch every time. So that was where the kind of concept of a building system like Actobotics was initiated. And since then, it's grown and really evolved a lot. So Servos City and Actobotics components are really great, and FTC teams have been using them for about 5 years now. And with really, that system wasn't designed with FTC in mind or any competition in robotics. It's really geared toward professionals and hobbyists who are trying to build a satellite tracker or a camera rig. And with that, it has a lot of great components for that, but it's not as kind of focused on FTC as we could make goBILDA. So goBILDA is, of course, the newer one, and with a basically clean start over, it let us improve a lot of things that are really, really hard to change in Actobotics and Servos City. So the primary one, I think, is the pattern, which is very different between the two websites and the two product lines. And really, the pattern that all of the holes are based on is going to be the biggest differentiating factor between any building system you go with. Tetrix will have a different one than Rev. That'll have a different pattern than we do. So I think that the whole patterns that both the websites use are really important to know about when you're designing custom parts to interface with any building system. But there are some key differences that I like to highlight when we're looking at Actobotics versus goBILDA. So Actobotics' whole pattern, you'll notice, is all based around bolt circles, which is where let's say you have these 8 holes. You define the distance between them by defining the distance between holes that are directly opposite one another, or crossing the center of the pattern. So in the Actobotics case, the 2 primary patterns you see are the 770 pattern and the 1.5 inch pattern. You also have a 1/2 inch center bore, and that'll repeat every 3/4 of an inch. So that is a really solid way to do it, and it's a way that circle-based hole pattern is the way that I believe every other FTC supplier does it. Rev might have 6 holes instead of 4 or 8, like Tetrix and AndyMark, but that circle pattern's kind of been the standard for a long time. It does lead to some limitations, though, because, say, the distance between these 2 holes is kind of an illogical number, and the distance between, say, these 2 holes will not line up quite as well. So the goBILDA pattern is all based around a grid. And a lot of companies do have grids that interface with their products, but goBILDA has every hole really on a grid somewhere. So it starts off with your 8mm grid, which is really cross-compatible with a lot of other components. Rev uses a lot of 8mm spacing parts, so does Tetrix and AndyMark, and even Lego is primarily 8mm spacing. Then you have a 14mm hole, which really is the biggest bore size for an FTC building system. This is designed around our bearings, which we like because they're kind of commonly available and easy to source, which makes them more affordable for teams. Then this is kind of the crux of the motion system that we use in goBILDA. It's a 16mm square. So unlike Servos, where you've got your pattern defined by a circle, we are defining it by a square, where the center of that square is centered on the 14mm center hole. This means that hubs will bolt in a lot of different places in the system. After you define those 4 holes, you duplicate them and rotate it 45 degrees. That means you can bolt, say, a hub at multiple orientations on that center bore. After that, we slot those center holes out to the 32mm holes, or the far holes there. That just gives you a lot of room to work with. And we also add this 24mm circle. This makes working with beams and other parts that are designed around an 8mm grid a lot easier to work with. So without that 24mm slot, you couldn't put a beam, say, across the hole pattern, because the distance between this hole and this hole is not a whole number. So we take that and slot that out to 24, which is, of course, evenly divisible by 8, which just gives you a lot of room and a lot of flexibility. And you can see that 24mm circle fits around all 8 of those primary holes. Then for channel, that's pretty much repeated every 24mm. So the goBILDA pattern is, I think, one of the things that you don't think about as being a big reason to go with the building system or not, but we spent a lot of time on making sure it was the best it could possibly be for our building system and give teams the most flexibility. So that's kind of what everything is based around. And really, if it's structure or motion, everything has something to do with that whole pattern. Our kind of primary structural element is channel. You saw the whole pattern information for that. Within that category, we have 2 different kinds of channel. So we have 1120 series U channel, which is a 48mm square, pretty much. and you can see all of the technical drawings there. So it's definitely bigger than Rev or Tetrix channels, but it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can run lots of motion components in channel and even put motors in it. A great example is you can run extrusion as a linear slide system. So this is really one of the foundation kind of building blocks that you use a lot in the goBILDA ecosystem. The other kind of channel that we offer is the 1121 series low side U channel, which is very similar on one face, but instead of those holes extending, instead of the sides extending all 48 millimeters, they only extend 12, which means you can do a lot of other cool things. A good example is you can box it to make really narrow channel that is really strong if you don't need to run very much motion in it, or make I-beams and other components. And this is really great for creating framework on top of a chassis. And overall, it's really lightweight and gives you a lot of flexibility there too. That's really the core of goBILDA. Channel is the thing you use 9 times out of 10 if you're building structure. goRail is our extrusion. It is a square slot, and it's great if you need to have parts that aren't on a pattern. So a great example was 7236, my team last year, their intake. It really wasn't perfect. It didn't get the right amount of squish on the stones if it was in one set of holes, but if you moved it a set of holes closer together, that 8 millimeters jump was a little too much, and it meant you had too much squish on the stones for the intake to work properly. So they tore that apart and mounted it on goRail, which lets you slide and lock structure components along the side. This is good and bad. It gives you a lot of flexibility, but it means stuff may not be quite as square, and it just has some room for error. One thing some teams will do is drill a hole in it to make a longer screw than necessary and lock stuff in place, and that works pretty well. But if you're really trying to get something that's solid in place all the time, something that uses holes on a pattern, I think is going to be your better bet. goRail is also used a lot in linear motion. That's primarily what open goRail is, and the hardware you need for that are, of course, goRail nuts. And with that, we also have some beams, which are great for small things, shafting and tubing. GoTube, as you can see here, is another one of our cool extrusions that is really, really helpful for structural components. Mounts are also a big part in goBILDA. I'd say this is the mount you're going to use 99% of the time. It's great for creating 2 parallel channels like this, and it also will hold a bearing and go on the end of goRail. So I think this is probably the most important mount for sure, and it has a run at one of the really most important parts in goBILDA. We've also got grid plates and pattern plates, which are pretty similar. Pattern plates are, of course, better at motion, and grid plates are going to be a little stronger and better for something like a belly pan on the bottom of the chassis. Brackets are similar to mounts, but generally they're going to be 2D, or they'll have kind of simple bends like these. And these are also really, really nice to have, but they're not quite as versatile. Base plates aren't very useful in FTC. Pattern adapters are one of the big things that we talk about a lot here at goBILDA with teams who are new to that building system, because they have a lot of other components that they've used for years and want to continue using on their robots, even if they switch over some of their components to goBILDA. So that's where our pattern adapters really do come in handy. They generally will have one set of goBILDA holes and one set of non-goBILDA holes. So a great example is this Tetrix to goBILDA pattern adapter. It's got the 16 millimeter across pattern here. That's threaded to 632. And it's also got the 16 millimeter square pattern that has an M4 bolt. And that's really great for mounting Tetrix components to goBILDA. And that's something that if you're working on changing over from, say, Actibotics or goBILDA or whatever products, that can be really helpful. Pattern spacers are a little niche. Standoff and spacers aren't anything new, but they're very nice to have. Threaded plates are kind of in the hardware realm, and as are hinges. With structure is a really core part of goBILDA, but I don't think it's what really sets it apart the most. I think that the most differentiating factor in goBILDA from other building systems is our motion. So one thing that that was a big priority for us with Actibotics, and again, it was a huge priority when making goBILDA, was being all ball bearing based. So you can't find a bushing on the goBILDA website. It's all going to be really smooth running ball bearings, which do really help increase the efficiency of mechanisms and make everything run very, very smooth. And also stand up to really heavy load. A lot of times when you load up a bushing or something like that, you can end up losing even more of your power because you have to spin that system along with the wheel or slide that you're moving. So being all bearing based really does make a huge difference. And we do our best to make sure that that doesn't add very much cost. It definitely will because they are a lot more complex than a bushing, but it increases your robot performance a lot and really does help. With that, you've got, we can kind of look at the rest of the motion category. So motors are a big thing. We have our Yellow Jacket series of gear motors, which a lot of FTC teams use. They're all going to be planetary or orbital gears, which helps a lot in terms of just the rigidity and the reliability of motors. Spur gearboxes by nature aren't as robust as planetary gearboxes. Those are planetary gearboxes will have multiple gears that carry the load in each stage, and they do a lot better when you're talking about side loading those gearboxes. So if you don't support the output of a spur gearbox really, really well, it likely will break, whereas it's very difficult to break a planetary gearbox with a lot of FTC loads. Within this section, the motor, so the thing that actually produces the power, stays the same, but the thing that changes is just the gearbox, and that's the part that we make here at goBILDA. The motor, we worked with Modern Robotics to make, and that's a very, very similar motor to the Rev HD Hex and the Andy Mark Neverest motor. It'll put out just about the same, I think it's right around 12 watts of output power. And so just from a straight up performance standpoint, you'll get a very, very similar amount of power out of a Rev HD Hex as you will out of a Yellow Jacket. The thing that you really want to look at is like the connectors and the gearbox and stuff like that. So the reason that all of these have different RPM and different torque is the gearbox. So let's take a look at this 435 RPM gear motor. So it runs at the bare motor with no gearbox will run at just about 6,000 RPM, and it has about 0.14 Newton meters of torque, which is really not very much. What the gearbox does is it slows that down a lot, and also because it's slowing that motor down, it'll also increase the torque that you get out of it. You're increasing the mechanical advantage. So this gearbox in particular slows that motor down by 13.7 to 1, which means it takes 13.7 rotations of the bare motor to equal 1 rotation of the output shaft. So you're increasing your torque by 13.7 times, and you're decreasing your speed by that same amount. So instead of 6,000 RPM, you're at 435. And instead of that really low torque number, you have this very reasonable one. So let's see. And the same can be true of, say, a 188 to 1 gear motor. This means it'll take 188 rotations of the bare motor to equal 1 rotation of the output shaft. This motor has just as much power as this gear motor because the motor is what's generating all of the force there. It's just reduced by a different amount. So this one will be much faster and this will be much slower, but with much more torque. This will also change things like the encoder ticks per minute. The, say, 188 one, because the encoder that counts the motor's rotation is on the bare motor, it happens before the gearbox, it will also take the gearbox ratio into effect. So this 3.7 to 1 has 100 and, let's say, 104 counts per revolution. This 188 to 1 has 5,264. So depending on the exact motor you get, you'll need to look at the encoder spec for it and see what how many counts per rotation you get out of it. One other cool thing about goBILDA is because the face of the gearbox is a goBILDA pattern. You can see that it has 4 holes on the 16 mil pattern. You don't need motor mounts almost ever. So with other motors, especially, you'll need some kind of mount to adapt it from whatever pattern's on the face to whatever pattern you're mounting it on. With goBILDA, you can straight up just bolt it to channel or bolt it to a pattern plate, and it works really well. The next big kind of thing in that vein is servos. We at goBILDA have a similar servo to, if you have very much experience with the Rev servo. They're both based on the same FTC FR5311, 5311M, excuse me. So the same programmer that you use to change a Rev smart robot servo will work to program a goBILDA servo as well. So they are a dual mode, which means you can go from continuous to positional mode. They will have varying levels of torque. So just like how your gear motor will change the torque and speed as you change the ratio in the gearbox, servos work the exact same way. So a super speed servo has just the exact same amount of power as a torque servo, but the exact gears that make up that gear train will change. And where a torque servo has about 300 to 1, a dual mode servo has, or excuse me, a super speed servo has about a 67 to 1 reduction. This means you get way more speed out of a super speed, but way less torque. So the exact servo you want to use will depend a lot on your application. Torque servos are great at things like small arms and small game object manipulators, where speed servos are great at linkages and other things that need to move linearly, and super speed servos are great at intakes and other things, and really light duty horizontal lifts. You can also servo blocks are a big thing. They are really the first product that we saw FTC teams use out of Actibotics. We pioneered the servo blocks in Servo City and made similar versions for goBILDA. So they are a really great way to increase the longevity of your servos. They support the output shaft really well, and they make them just a lot more robust. So that's a great thing to pick up for your team to kind of protect the servos that you do have. Let's see here. We also have a lot of servo mounts and servo attachments if you choose not to use a servo block, and you may want to pick up a programmer if you go with some goBILDA dual mode servos to be able to switch those from the standard servo mode, where you'll run from a rotation, you'll move an amount of degrees, to continuous mode, where it'll act like a motor and it'll just run until you tell it to stop. Before we move on in the motion components, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do for FTC teams. So since we have a big market outside of FTC, it lets us help out FTC teams a lot more, really a lot. So the biggest thing that we will do for every first team that wants to buy stuff from us is our team discount. So every team that applies gets a 25% off discount code. This works for almost everything in goBILDA, with very, very few exceptions. Those exceptions are not parts that FTC teams would use anyway, but really everything is 25% off all the time. So if you're a new customer, you just want to make an account in the sign in section and then fill out this really fun form here, and we'll get back to you probably within a business day or two basically we'll change your account to be included in that 25% off discount code, and then everything will show up as 25% off sale all the time. We also sponsor a ton of teams. So we did a lot for teams last year, and we're doing even more this year. The primary thing we're doing as far as past the team discounts is our FTC promo. So we are giving 150 teams a Strafer chassis for $150. So that's our drivetrain chassis. That's all Mecanum based, and we'll talk about that a little more in just a minute. But that includes 4 motors, miter gears, Mecanum wheels, and a bunch of other stuff for like way cheap. That's like the cost of just the motors in that kit if you're looking at it there. So I would definitely make sure to start off and sign up for that. That closes September 30th. So make sure you apply for that before that closes, because a big thing that I saw a lot of teams, rookies and veterans alike, struggle with is just having a chassis that works really well, and having that solid chassis under your feet, even if you just use the components and don't build exactly a Strafer chassis, is really huge. I always say that a good chassis will probably not win you any matches, but a bad chassis will absolutely lose you matches. So having a drivetrain that's just not going to break is so important for really everything you do in FTC. And focusing on those mechanisms is really what I think a lot of teams enjoy in FTC. Figuring out how to score these rings will be a really fun thing. And if you can get a chassis and focus on the scoring elements, that I think will help a lot of teams be a lot more competitive, and will also be really fun and rewarding, especially if your chassis doesn't break mid-run over and over and over. So I would definitely try your best to jump on that, and we will definitely start shipping out these chassis before. I believe we're shooting for sending them out by the second week in October. So very shortly after that program application ends. So we also do sponsor events. So if you're running an event this year, shoot us an email, marketing@goBILDA.com. We gave a ton of stuff out to Maryland Tech Invitational, and also sponsored that event last year and the year before. And I think the year before that too. So invitationals are a big thing that we sponsor. And we also sponsor some FTC events too. We sponsored a ton of kickoffs. I'm sure that we had some giveaways the other day, so probably yesterday on these streams. So that is definitely something to look at if you're looking at hosting an invitational or an in-season event. So let's jump back into parts, because that's really what I love. It's what a lot of FTC teams really love to focus on in goBILDA. So we're going to take a look at the kits section as well. So The kit section of our website has a lot of components that are really geared toward FTC teams. Our Strafer chassis is probably one of our best-selling kits. It's that chassis kit we've talked about. It's a 4-motor Mecanum drivetrain, which is an omnidirectional drivetrain that lets you go in all 4 of those directions, just depending on how you program it and all of that stuff. Excuse me. So it uses this version that you can see here uses bevel gears. The new version, the V2, which we'll actually be sending out to those 150 teams, runs at a much faster ratio, and it will use miter gears and it'll be a slower motor, but it will have a 1-to-1 ratio between the motor and the wheels, whereas the V1 will have a 2-to-1 ratio between the motors and the wheels. This means that it's shooting for closer to 5 feet per second, which is a really nice number for FTC robots. The biggest selling point is with the Strafer chassis, your motors are in the drive rails. So all of the center space is completely open. These center channels are really just suggestions. You can put the frame supports anywhere you want. I've seen teams relocate them up above their frame rails and run game objects completely through the center of their robot, and that can be a really powerful strategy. So it's going to be a really good chassis. It's a good chassis, and it's getting even better very, very soon. We are also having another chassis kit that we're releasing very soon here. I think we may be giving one away to one of your teams. I'm not sure if we've done that already or whatever, but that's going to be called the B-Line, and it's a really sweet 6-wheel drive chassis. Probably not something that's very useful in this game compared to Mecanums, but I think it is going to be really fun. We also have a lot of linear motion kits. The linear actuator kit is something that we've sold to a ton of goBILDA teams and a ton of non-goBILDA teams, and it's been used all the way up by world's winning teams. We also have a version on Servos City that's used a lot too, but that is a great way of using a lead screw and a motor to power linear motion. It's great at single stage things, so I might look at this on my robot in 3 days that's starting tomorrow. I think I might grab one of these kits to move the wobble bridge because it's pretty slow, but it's got a lot of power, and it's got a stroke length that feels really reasonable for that challenge. We also have more traditional FTC multi-stage linear motion systems. So our 4-stage cascading kit was used a ton last year in Skystone, and it has 4-channel sliding sections that will extend out to really high compared to how short it starts out with. You'll want to pair this with a yellow jacket or another gear motor. And depending on the speed of the gear motor, the speed and torque ratio you go with, you'll get a faster or a slower slide with more or less linear force. The 13.7-to-1 435 RPM gear motor is the one I use at 9 times out of 10. It's not as blisteringly fast as a faster gear motor, but it has a really nice balance between a good amount of speed and a good amount of thrust, so you can pick up a lot of stuff. We also have a 2-stage version, which is shorter, doesn't go as far, and is a little more affordable. And we have a 3-stage kit, which I don't think is worth it. This kit's definitely on its way out. It's going to be not as smooth and more expensive when you start buying the components you need to run it than a 4-stage cascading kit. So these two are really the way to go as far as linear motion kits, and the linear actuator is a great thing too. Lastly, in the kit section, we are looking at the FTC kit. So the FTC kit we have as a crazy discount for teams. The retail of all of the parts in this kit is almost $1,400, and we really tried to get this kit to be the best option for teams that are starting out. So it's got, we heard a lot of feedback from our kit last year that it was a great sampler. It had a ton of different goBILDA parts, but it wasn't very good at making robots. So this year we threw it out pretty much and said, okay, we're going to redesign this from the ground up to be very, very good at creating robots from scratch. So it's not perfect. You probably won't be able to build a world's class or maybe even state class in some regions robot out of just the components in the kit. But it was really important to us to make sure that every team could figure out a way to afford an FTC kit from goBILDA. So we shot for that kind of nice price point between enough parts to build a really good robot and enough parts and affordable for your average team. So the big change we made this year was that it includes all of the parts you need to build a chassis kit. So it makes this really sweet 6-wheel drive chassis, and you can put as many parts into it as you want, pretty much. We have a really base level, which you'd use 2 motors and you'd only power 2 wheels with. You can also go ahead and power all 6 wheels and use 4 motors on it. You could also power 2 wheels with 4 motors, or only use 2 motors to power all 6 wheels. And we also included some dropped center plates, which help a lot for just turning speed with 6-wheel drive chassis like this. So this really fully specced out kit is my favorite chassis that comes on this kit. But you may need the chain and sprockets that you would use to power those Omni wheels in another part of your robot, or you may need the 2 remaining motors. Because this chassis uses every motor in that kit. So if you're trying to run on 1 rev hub, or if you just don't have the funding to get more motors in, only using 2 is a great way to go. The motors we chose are a 312 RPM gear motor. That is our favorite balance between torque and speed out of any motor we sell. It's great drivetrain ratio motor. We're using it in all of our chassis kits starting this year, and you can make it pretty fast or pretty slow with the gears we include in the kit. So we have gears that you can use to create a 1-to-1 ratio where you're not changing the speed at all. We have gears you can use to create a 3-to-1 ratio. So if you mesh the 90-tooth gear with a 30-tooth gear, this means you can either increase the speed of that gear motor 3 times, so it's 3 times as fast, about 900 RPM, or you can decrease the speed by 3. And a cool thing you can do with gears is you can stack those. So if I say have let's say a 20-to-1, we'll round it up a little bit. I have a 20-to-1 ratio there. I can then take that 20-to-1, multiply it by 3, and I have a 60-to-1 gear motor. Then I could multiply that again by 3, and I'm looking at 180-to-1. So it is really powerful, and it can give you a lot of speed options. Let's see here. We also have a lot of chain and sprockets. A lot of those you end up using in the FTC or in that drivetrain kit if you decide to build that, but you also have a lot left over too if you just want to use them for other mechanisms. There are wheels, bearings, shafting, hubs, both hyper and sonic hubs, collars, and couplers, which are very, very solid and kind of baseline motion components that you use on pretty much every robot you're looking at. There's also a ton of hardware, and some linkages which are really, really helpful for using servos especially, and some tools and wire management stuff as well. So this is really my favorite way to start out as an FTC team, is to pick up one of these kits, get those parts in your student's hand, and start building stuff, start prototyping as soon as possible. My favorite 1-2 combo, and the thing that I tell almost every FTC team I talk to on the tech support phones to start off with, is a master kit and a strafer chassis. That can be even more affordable if you get that $150 strafer chassis. But if you can shell out that about $900 in parts, you get a really solid Mecanum chassis and a ton of parts. Because you're not using a lot of those in your chassis anymore, you get a lot of those parts to start working with the actual game elements that you can use in the robot itself. Let's see here. um, those are really the kits that we offer, at least right now. We may look at additional kits as the season goes on. A lot of times we do have a more season specific kit. So that may not be something we end up coming out with this year, but that could definitely be something we look at as things go on. For just a few minutes, because we don't have a whole lot of time left, I'll talk about the rest of the motion components you find in goBILDA. The thing that so back a couple years ago when I had a friend on when I was still in FTC on a team called Mechanical Paradox, and they're a super great team, and I'm very fortunate to have a friend who's a big part of that team. And she was super excited about goBILDA. She was like, "Hey, this is the new Servos City thing. It's a lot of fun, and it was made by the same guys who make that Actibotics components that a lot of teams love." And I was skeptical at first. I wasn't sure on it. Believe it or not, I was not always very, very goBILDA. And the thing that sold me, and the thing that I always say we need to send to more teams, is the Sonic Hub. So when I was a Tetrix team, the thing that I always struggled with was hubs. You have a set screw hub, and that set screw can come loose over the course of a match, and your drivetrain will stop working, or your intake will stop working. And that sucks. And as an FTC team and as an FTC student, there's not really a whole lot you can learn from that experience. Like, yeah, I know set screws suck now, but that's not, they don't really in some applications. But now now I lost my $500 match and I didn't learn anything of real value from it. So, having a good motion system that's really reliable is something that was a huge deal to me coming out of FTC and struggling with that for a long time. So, as silly as a $6 part converting me to a new building system sounds, that was what did it. And looking at that hub, I said, wow, that's a game changer. So, really, almost every hub in goBILDA is clamping, which means you have these what are called pinch bolts that actually move material in a hub to apply a clamping force to a shaft. This is a great way of constraining it from sliding on the shaft. And the thing that actually does most of the work at transferring torque is the drive. So the bore of the hub matches the profile of a shaft, and that means you get a lot of positive drive, is what we call it. On, say, a hex bore or an 8 rex or a rex bore, very similar things, that is amplified even more because you have all of these flats. You just have a ton of surface area you can use to transfer that. Hyper hubs are the other really big seller in goBILDA. These outsell Sonics sometime, and they're kind of the heavier duty hub option where you might need a little more beef than a Sonic. They are also a dual pinch bolt clamping hub, and they're really solid if you can fit them. Things like Mecanum wheels have a center bore that will fit a hyper, so you don't add any additional width to your system, but you get a little bit of a stronger hub that's going to be just a little more robust. We've almost never seen teams destroy Sonic hubs except on really huge arms and stuff like that, but in those really heavy duty applications, hypers are the way to go. We do have some other hub options like the classic clamping and the set screw, which both have their place, but 9.5 times out of 10, I'm gonna reach for a Sonic or a Hyper. We also work a lot with gears. So I'll try to rapid fire these gears. The trick to gears is to work on the goBILDA pattern. You need a total of either 60 teeth or 120 teeth. So in this case, we've got two 60 teeth gears. There's a center hole that's empty between those gears. So we know that that's a wider spacing than some systems. So we need 120 teeth between both gears. We can get there with either two 60 tooth gears or say a 100 tooth gear and a 20 tooth gear. It makes spacing gears on goBILDA really easy. You can also have a set of gears that goes to the very next hole. This is generally done with two 30 tooth gears, where you have 60 teeth total because your center distance is halved. That means the total number of teeth you need in your system is halved. You can also say go from a 24 to a 36 or from a 20 to a 40, and those will change the gear ratio speed combinations you have in your system. We also work a lot with sprockets and chain. The chain we use in goBILDA is different than your standard chain because we have a metric center distance channel. We really want metric chain because it means you don't need a tensioner or an idler 9 times out of 10. So that helps a ton with just the simplicity and ease of use for a chain. So it's unfortunately not compatible with other chain that AndyMark or Tetrix or Rev uses, but it's really powerful in terms of ease of use in goBILDA. And we have a ton of different sprockets for that, and we have some really heavy-duty plastic chain, which is very awesome. We also have belts and pulleys. I think our 5mm HTD is really sweet. It's not quite as versatile as chain, but it's really smooth, and especially if you're a little bit of a higher level team, I would go this way. The reason we go with chain in, say, the FTC kit is it's a lot easier, it's a lot more versatile. Whereas a belt is only ever going to be one length, so it's only going to work with one set of pulleys over one distance. Chain you can break again and use over and over and over. So it's a really nice investment, even though it's maybe not quite as smooth or nice to work with as belts. I think those are the big things. We have a couple different styles of shafting, 6mm D and 8mm Rex. A lot of our new components are moving to 8mm Rex shafting because it's a nice positive drive heavy duty shaft. But 6D is the standard. It's used in lots of FTC different building systems, so it's a great thing to go with. That's what the FTC kit uses, and it's what our motors are. If you guys have any questions at all for me, make sure to post them in the Q&A, and we can spend a few minutes answering those. But if you have any questions further on, you think of something, do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can find me. I'm Ethan at goBILDA.com. So ETHAN at GOBILDA.com. And you can just shoot me an email if you have any questions, even if they're not related to goBILDA. I'm happy to help out. Mentoring FTC teams is what I love. I do it all day long, and then I come home and sit on my computer and talk to more FTC teams about more FTC stuff. So if you have any questions, just reach out. You can also give us a call. We are 620-705-5959, and you can either ask for tech support or ask for Ethan. Chances are, if you say you're an FTC team, you'll find a way to talk to me, and I will be able to help you out on most things. This is really what I love. There's definitely a reason I'm here on a Sunday afternoon doing this class for you guys, and that's because I just love FTC and love being able to help out as many teams as I can. I really wish that I had some nicer parts when I was in FTC, and I want to be able to help out every team that I can get the parts to be as successful as they can be. Yep, so my personal email is ethan at goBILDA.com. You can also reach me at tech@goBILDA.com. I'll check that as well. But Ethan at goBILDA.com goes to my cell phone, so I'll be able to jump on that probably a little bit faster. I'm also some other good resources that are generally for FTC teams, and I'm sure you've probably heard of these before. Game Manual Zero. Manual Zero is a project that I worked on mostly kind of in the kind of back end and editorial stance. I designed the logo and stuff like that, but it is a bunch of really high level, very competitive FTC students and mentors got together and wrote the best guide that we could for getting started in FTC. So I really think this is a great place to start. It can be kind of like drinking from a fire hose sometimes if you're a new team. Even if you're an experienced team, there's just a lot of information here. But it's a great resource, and there are a bunch of teams who we've talked to who've just printed this out and had it in their workshop to be able to flip to a specific page. We have information there on timing belts and chains and a bunch of other things like that. Let's see here. Some goBILDA specific resources. Product insights are the big thing that we work on a ton. We have a PDF where you can download every single one on our website and see how parts are used with other parts. These here are what we call product insights, and they're just a kind of a concept level way to show how to use a part in goBILDA with another part. And we love them because every part on the goBILDA website makes sense to us, and it's a great way for us to show you how it makes sense, like where we would use it and stuff like that. So that's a great resource about goBILDA. And let's see here. We also create YouTube videos. We're doing live streams at goBILDA.tv. You can also go to twitch.tv/goBILDATV. So we're going to be doing a live stream every Friday at 4 Central, 5 Eastern. And this week especially, we're going to be doing some robot in 3 days. So we have an FTC alumni who's coming down from Iowa to work with us and build a robot for this game on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. That'll be from noon Eastern to 5 Eastern. And we'll post a lot of that content over on YouTube as well. Let's see. I think that's about all I have for you guys. I can't stress enough. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. I really, really like being able to help out teams with whatever they're struggling with. And it's really my favorite part of my job here at goBILDA.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions for the chat, I will go ahead and wrap up this session here. So, I mean, it was, of course, a wonderful presentation. So thank you, everyone, for attending this session and attending the symposium in general. This is the last event, so there are no other sessions to go to. However, all of them have been recorded and will be uploaded to Georgia First's YouTube channel within probably the next week. So thank you to Ethan, and thank you to our attendees for being so respectful of his time. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.